Hi guys, how's it going?
Good. Hi, going good.
So tell me a little bit about yourself, your name, what you've studied.
I'm Priyadarshini. I used to practice law. I studied in GLC Bombay and I also did my master's at Columbia Law School in New York.
Awesome.
I'm Pallavi. I'm a full stack software developer who used to be a lawyer. I graduated from NUJS, practiced in some of the top law firms in India, as well as an in-house counsel. And then I did my master's from Harvard Law School, post which I cleared the New York bar exam and practiced as a US attorney in an international law firm.
Oh, that's fantastic. Real diversity. So I started India's first legal incubation center back when I was in law school. And that's kind of what got me into this journey. So I would love to hear a little bit about what was that moment in both of your careers and that in practice where you went aha and that you realized legal tech is actually a career option and almost like a trajectory and a category that you're both a part of now.
So I don't think my moment was truly aha. It culminated over time. It started out when I was practicing tech law and we were advising different tech companies on all of the regulatory approvals they require before the tech goes on the shelves. And that's when I realized, my God, there's really good tech out there that can really help us, and why aren't we using it? It took me still a couple of years to just get to legal tech. I continued practicing law for some more time, and then I started a fitness tech startup, and then finally pivoted to legal tech.
Wow. So from technology law to legal tech.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Pretty much.
Well, I think my trajectory was, I think, just the reverse of that. So, I think as a developer, I also wanted to leverage my skills that I had built over the years as a lawyer, and legal tech seemed like the perfect space for it because that could just combine my love for both engineering as well as law, and that's how I got into legal tech.
Wow, I love how both of y'all got to the same point
From
through
two different
diametrically opposite routes. For me, well, it was honestly, I never wanted to build anything in legal AI, but here I am. I just wanted to get home really early on a Friday when the judge asked me to review 200 pages of case law, and I said, there needs to be a better way to do this. So just singular obsession with like speed and efficiency in process got me here. But I'd love to hear your takes on where you think India is positioned in the legal tech market and how do you think we pace ourselves globally?
I think India is a great place from a supply of talent perspective. In fact, probably the largest number of legal tech startups in the world are founded in India. Even the global legal tech startups, a lot of their CEOs or founders are from India or of Indian origin. So I think India is very well placed from a supply perspective.
Okay, I love that.
I think the Indian market is at a very nascent stage when it comes to legal tech. There's a set of people who are very excited about it, very open to adopting new tools and how AI can help the legal workflow. Whereas there's other set of people who are very skeptical about it, not very open towards this. So I think it's going to be a challenge to kind of bring everyone on board into adopting new technologies. But at the same time, I feel like this is the right time with the AI burst and everything for the Indian market to explore legal tech, especially in AI.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with that in the sense that I think so far what we've been doing is duct taping technology on Indian law in a way that didn't really make a lot of sense. But with AI, we now have the opportunity to sort of reimagine how we automate that system and reinvent how law moves in India. So yeah, super exciting time. I have one more question. If you had the opportunity to automate any process in law, whatever you've seen so far through your lived experience, what would that be?
I think post-its, if we're allowed to say that. Because
I love that.
you're always looking for, when you're a lawyer, the right color coding for the post-it, and you can't find a post-it or you can't find the right color. And then if somebody else has already put a post-it, then you can't really understand what they've written because nobody can read a lawyer's handwriting.
I love that. Clearly, a lot of lawyers work in this office.
Yeah, case in point. I don't know if you can understand anything here. Okay, some things you can, not everything.
Truly. What about you, Pallavi? What's
I
something
think
you want to
if
change?
I were to choose one thing that I could automate, I think it would be the judiciary.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel in India that there are so many case backlogs, and with AI in picture, I think there's this tremendous opportunity to bridge that gap. Uh, and yeah, I think that's one place that I would want to start.
Right. I think judicial intelligence, and this is the way I look at it, shouldn't just be stored in a judge's mind in a courtroom, right? It should flow through the judicial system. And I think with AI, we now have that opportunity to sort of build out that flow and create that workflow where the entire system moves at a much faster pace because of it.
Absolutely. It's more like, democratizing that knowledge and making it more accessible, because otherwise it was just sitting in like a repository somewhere which the common man didn't necessarily have access to. So I think AI can really help move that knowledge to the common man.
Right. I mean, just the fact that most legal information lives behind paywalls and in some repositories of some
Really expensive books.
facts. Truly, having to pay for all of those out of pocket in law school, very, very painful experience.
Yeah, completely. Like to kind of democratize that knowledge and give the common man access to that. AI can totally do that in terms of the judiciary as well as in terms of the laws. So typically, then anyone can kind of search and find the answer to their specific problem. And I think that's great. It's really what the law was meant to do, help the common man.
Yeah. I think I look at law as an operating system. Pallavi would relate here. I think, and when this operating system is not updated, so to say, and I think the Indian law has been at an analog for a while, I think you tend to see things like millions languishing in jail, under trial prisoners that don't get access to the trials at the adequate times. You see businesses failing because diligence doesn't happen fast enough. You see regulatory challenges coming up. And I think that when something as fundamental as the law is not brought up to speed with time, you're really going to see changes and repercussions that sort of affect multiple stakeholders.
Yeah, and in fact, law, if you just think about it broadly, it affects two arms of the government, the legislature and the judiciary. So it's if that is not fixed and the rule of law with justice delivery is not in order, that impacts the whole economy.
I'd love to hear a little bit about how y'all are designing things to sort of tackle these problems that you're talking about.
I think it's first, like everybody says, it's not too cliche, I think, to just say fall in love with the problem, because we're all, I mean, it's very easy to start thinking of solutioning, but I also think, especially with India, we have our own unique problems, and how do we solve for them? Building in India for Indians, where multicultural, multilingual. Our courts are also multilingual. Arguments also in courts are sometimes in two different languages. So how do we solve for all of that? Even from a transcription perspective or the final order perspective, translating it, making it accessible to people that understand different languages. It all starts with just figuring out what is the problem first. Let's focus on the problem. Let's identify all of the things that we want to solve for, and then start looking at how can we solve for this, all of these different problems that we've stated.
Right. I think the knowledge gap needs to be built. I think the first task is to make tools and lawyers friends, because people have to be open to adopting new technology and understand what AI can actually do for them. A lot of people aren't aware of this, so I think that would be the first step to kind of break that barrier between lawyers adopting new technology, adopting AI tools.
Right. Why do you think lawyers are so innovative when it comes to sort of adopting new tech?
I think that's a part of the job description, is it not? To kind of be very super cautious about everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that lawyers are inherently, trained to look at the risk in any situation. And technology is never 100%, even when they talk in terms of uptime, like 99.99 is still really good. And to a lawyer, they'd be like, okay, I can't rely on that.
A lawyer may be SLA then. Right. No, I think when you look at like the kind of efficiency that it can bring in workflows, I think like it's going to come not just from inside but externally, when you have clients demanding law firms to start adopting this kind of technology. And I think that's when we're going to see a real shift in the market.
So I think yeah, people who are left behind, who are not able to adopt these tools, I think they will kind of lose out both in terms of the kind of legal services they're able to deliver their clients, um, the kind of efficiency.
So what you're saying is AI is not going to take your job, but a lawyer who uses AI is most definitely going to take your job.
Yes, definitely.
I think it's also a shift in the paradigm of being very a service heavy professional to moving to a profession that is kind of tech enabled, AI empowered, so you less service heavy. And there are certain things that you can kind of streamline in terms of quality processes, and then you just know that no matter what, I will always get, this level of quality on any document or this level of quality on any type of advice, because you've just streamlined all of those checks and balances using tech.
So I think the three of us have smartly sort of segued to a site that's going to be alive even 10 years from now. But would love to hear what the two of you think about what the future of legal work looks like for traditional lawyers.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because there's a lot of fear among people who are presently in law school. Like, what do we do when we come out? Because our jobs are going to be taken over by AI. But I think the way to think of it is like if you're looking at Venn diagrams, you had the tech folks here and the legal folks here, and previously they were mutually exclusive. And now we're looking at more an intersection where there's an overlap. And there's going to be more people needed in the overlap space, and the space in the overlap is going to keep growing. So, in fact, Richard Susskind in his book Tomorrow's Lawyers has outlined at least 16 new job categories that will be there at the intersection of law and tech. So you've got legal engineers, legal process folks, literally 16 professions that he's outlined that will come at the intersection of tech and law. So I think that will be very, very exciting. And that's literally expanding the pie.
Yeah, I think if I were to tell a law student today, I'd say, don't learn how to cite, learn how to prompt. That's definitely my go-to advice. What about you, Pallavi?
I think things are definitely going to look very different in the coming years. The way lawyers read documents, process complex information, do their diligencing, research. I think everything is going to get streamlined, and we are going to get much more time on our plates to kind of maybe concentrate more on the human centric side of things, on the human centric side of law, rather than I think the mundane tasks that AI can certainly take up and excel at. So
I think what we've seen, and we've seen this revolution happen in almost every industry. Like fintech revolutionized the way money moves in our economy. Health tech has sort of revolutionized the way we diagnose illness. But I feel like law has come to that point where we sort of have to rethink what lawyers actually do. Fundamentally, and I think Pallavi, you were telling me earlier that like what law is a bunch of these axioms and these truths that can sort of be boiled down at a very fundamental level to a language that a large language model can understand. So then it sort of begs the question of what value truly a lawyer is adding to that entire process, right? Like there's a certain strategy, but how easily can that strategy be replicated? AI is great at picking up patterns, picking up analysis. Tomorrow, a lawyer leaves the law firm. They tend to leave with a reportage of information and sort of they go away with the proprietary knowledge set that they have. But what happens when we augment lawyers with AI? AI sort of mimics that strategy. So what really happens to lawyers?
Yeah, and you could possibly also move to the phase where you have non-lawyers providing this legal advice because they're augmented by good AI that has been trained on laws.
Yeah, and I mean, I think India's very sort of right now. I'm not really sure where we are on that trajectory, but I think we're not far from that point where you don't need the middleman anymore, right? Like fintech came in for that purpose, where you don't need to have that broker in the middle who's transacting everything for you. You have platforms where you can directly engage. And I think law is at that brink of change. It's going to be a really exciting time for lawyers, especially the ones who still want to go through the traditional route. But yeah, I would love to hear what you think as well.
yeah, I think AI and the future. I think in the future, access to justice is going to look very different because even the common man is going to have the tools at his or her fingertips to be able to kind of navigate their way through the legal systems. Of course, not saying that they're going to replace lawyers, but I think they're going to be much well equipped, both in terms of knowing their rights and then maybe seeking justice. Um, in quotes. So yeah, it's very exciting to see.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, I would say you'd see it in a nuanced manner across different practice areas. So, for instance, you can totally see already there are services that will automate incorporation or registration of a trademark, and you don't need like the middleman or anybody. It can just be a tool that is doing all of this for you. In fact, there are also tools that will kind of check your trademark. It'll look at the registry, and the AI is looking for anything similar, sounds like all of that. Whereas, like she was saying, you still will not have a AI argue for you in court. So I think there are stages to the support that AI can provide an individual, which is either a lawyer or a non-lawyer, to help them complete that service of legal service delivery. So we'll really have to see which practice areas it is most acceptable to use right now, and which practice areas we can work on making it better.
So I know both of you are trained in the law, but I'd love to hear about your level of tech sophistication, whether you know how to code or how you started coding and how you learned.
So I don't technically know how to code, though I did try. I also dabbled a little bit in the low code, no code tools. And while I didn't become like Pallavi and actually learn how to program, I think it was a very useful experiment because you kind of understood what are the possibilities of tech and what can tech actually do. And I think it's important in the legal context because when you know a particular mode of legal service delivery and you know what is capable in tech, then you can marry those two and see what works best in which type of situation.
Awesome.
Yes, I do know how to code, at least for Jana's sake.
I'm glad.
So I'm a self-taught coder. I picked up coding through a bunch of online courses. My husband helped me a lot with it. He's a software engineer. And I did an intensive boot camp in the Bay Area that kind of really pushed my learning curve. And yeah, that's how.
Awesome. So, of course, I also have a training in the law, but I've always had a penchant for design thinking and thinking about how to improve the way systems work. So, in fact, last week I sort of built out my first ever full stack app using a bunch of AI tools. And that got me thinking if a lawyer like me could sort of get into coding with no prior experience, how hard is it, do you think, for somebody without any background or training in the law to pick up legal skills? For example, a coder.
I don't think it's hard. I just think coders, when they start to learn about the law, they find it a little confusing. Things like precedent don't intuitively make sense. Like, why should a judgment that was passed 10 years ago still be binding on me today if it's not really relevant in today's context? So I think those things take some time to understand, but you can learn anything if you put your mind to it.
Mm-hmm. I guess that kind of begs the question of, so what truly makes a lawyer eligible to practice and not somebody who doesn't have that formal training? So Pallavi doesn't have any formal training as a coder, but now she's a software engineer, which sort of creates this artificial barrier to entry, which is the bar creates. So I don't know, like, is it something that should exist?
I think the kind of work that lawyers do versus what coders do, that there's a difference in the stake involved. Of course, historically, the concept of law having licensing requirements, it all comes down to the fact that it's looked at, of course, in the Indian market, it was looked at as the noble profession, and not everyone could become a lawyer. So, these barriers were set in place. And of course, that doesn't apply to coders. So, for example, in the medical profession, I don't think I would want to go to somebody who knows the skill, who knows the knowledge of being a doctor, but doesn't have a license to practice. So I think that kind of gives lawyers or doctors, the licensing requirements give lawyers, doctors the credibility for them to be able to practice the profession.
So I think I fundamentally disagree with the analogy that you made with healthcare. I think healthcare still has some semblances and attempts that it makes to sort of incorporate this unlicensed sort of practice with, you see this with epidemiology and like public health, so public disease surveillance. And I think like fintech is a much better example of this if you make the parallel where 30 years ago, imagine doing like a tax audit or a a sort of tax filing online. Everyone was super uncertain about doing things like that. Whereas today, I couldn't think of going to an auditor, right? I would much rather do it on one tab and one screen from the comfort of my house. And I think that's a systemic change that we've seen. But I think that's impossible to have in the law, where you have practices that are run with families that have access or control the access to entry to such areas of practice, right? And I think when a system favors access over merit, it's very hard to break out of this.
And I think, to add to your point, there are some countries that are thinking about this and are actually democratizing it and deregulating it, especially the UK and some states in the US, where they're actually saying, okay, you don't have to be a lawyer to provide ABCD services. And that's really helped more people get access to a legal service on a commoditized basis.
Yeah, that's fantastic, right? And that really begs the question, what is the real value that a lawyer is adding if a tool or a technology is able to give you that access or that advice?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And I think you have the whole spectrum of legal services, which can be something as basic as filing for an incorporation, filing for a trademark registration, to arguing in court because of violation of a non-compete clause. And obviously, arguing in court because of violation of a non-compete clause, you want a lawyer there and not an AI representing you. But you can clearly have tools, not just AI, do all of the other filing related information. You don't need a lawyer for that, which traditionally previously you did. So I think it's a spectrum of legal services, and the smarter that tools get, they move up the value chain of legal services. And today we're not there where they can represent you in court, but it's definitely eating into the space of the exclusive domain that used to be captured only by lawyers.
I'm going to say not yet, with a big asterisk mark of coming soon. This was so great. Thank you so much for your time, guys.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun here.
Me too.
Let's get back to building.